Most illicit drug users also drink. Most alcohol abusers use other drugs. This is something we especially saw in Europe. They did a study in 2003 in Europe. They looked at 600 adolescent drug users. 80% used both marijuana and alcohol. I've told you the story. Well, maybe I have. My son used to work in Denver. He was a bartender. And people would come in. Of course, it's legal to smoke in Denver. And that's one of the reasons why I left Colorado, because he doesn't smoke pot, for one thing. And it changed the way people acted. People would come into the bar and who had been smoking marijuana, they'd order a shot or whatever, tequila or a beer or whatever. They'd drink the alcohol and they'd go to sleep. They'd pass out. In essence, they were passing out. They were so relaxed that they'd pass out. Well, of course, what happens if somebody passes out at a bar? What do you do with them?
Drag him out.
Well, you're responsible for that individual as soon as they come into your bar. You're responsible for that individual. If they die right there on the spot, you can be sued by their family. Well, when these people pass out like this, they had to call the ambulance. They didn't really have much of a choice. Otherwise, they would be liable. Of course, if they came in with friends and those friends were passed out as well, then they try to talk them out of it. And of course, depending on how cool they were, they would, they will allow people to take them out of the bar. Well, my son's not cool at all, and it pissed him off that these people were coming in and passing out in the bar. So he called the ambulance right away, and the police. Of course, they have to call the police as well. People were pretty upset with my son. He was also upset with the fact that, of course, this has to do with marijuana, not with alcohol. But the people that he was working with were smoking pot. And when you smoke pot, you're not very responsible. So if it was a lot of times, it was the wait staff. So the lady would go and she would take somebody's order and she'd forget to turn it in. And, of course, or she would sit down with the people and start talking to them, as strange as that may seem. Anyway, he seemed to be the only person doing any work. A similar study in the United States of adolescents in treatment found that 96% used alcohol with other drugs, crystal meth, heroin, whatever. A study in 2006 in the United States found that among heavy drinkers, 32.2% used illicit drugs at the same time. 80 to 95% of drinkers also smoke cigarettes, while 70% of alcoholics are heavy smokers, as compared to 25% of the general population. I had a friend that I played softball with, and she and her friends weren't drinkers. They didn't drink except after a softball game. They would go and they would have a couple of beers. Actually, they'd go and they'd get drunk, which was kind of interesting. But anytime they drank, they smoked. She didn't smoke cigarettes. The only time she smoked was when she drank. As confusing as that is. And then, of course, her breath smelled like an ashtray. You mix alcohol and cigarette smoke in your mouth, what does it smell like? Yeah, well, it smells like urine is what it smells like, which is a very pleasant thing. Yeah, so this lady's getting right up in your face and talking to you, and oh my God, it just kind of punches you right in the nose. Anyway, 80 to 95% of drinkers also smoke, while 70% of alcoholics are heavy smokers, as compared to 25% of the general population. Tobacco and alcohol are used to facilitate social situations, and that's what she did. She used it to, and they'd get up and do karaoke. I know. If she wasn't drunk, you couldn't get her to do karaoke.
I'm sorry, I just had a flashback.
I'm sad. I'm so sorry that I forced you to have this flashback.
No, it's funny because I was the onlooker and.
Oh, I know. She'd also start taking her clothes off, which is kind of interesting, especially when she's up there singing karaoke with her pals, and all of a sudden she starts stripping, which is really kind of bizarre. Of course, I'm trying to stop her, and everybody else is pulling me back, trying to keep me from stopping her. Anyway, I don't drink, of course, and I was just stuck in the mud. I was the one that was stuck in the mud more than anybody else. When alcohol and marijuana are used together, it accelerates relaxation, and that's what I was just talking about. A lot of times they get really relaxed. Sometimes they pass out, and that's what my son was dealing with in Denver. Drinking before using cocaine will prolong and intensify the effects of the cocaine, though it increases the predisposition for violence. And of course, this is a really serious problem. They had an individual that snorted cocaine. Well, there was snorting cocaine in Helena, Montana, when I was working up there. And this individual, oh geez, he was walking along the street and he beat somebody to death with a baseball bat. It was a similar situation they had, and it was in Helena again. Crystal meth. The guy beat the individual to death with a baseball bat. So, but this guy was snorting cocaine and drinking alcohol. He was drunk as a skunk, and he beat the guy to death with a baseball bat. Why they have so many baseball bats laying around in Helena, Montana, I have no idea. But here we have two situations, and actually they went to trial almost at the same time. It's really kind of a bizarre situation. So there were people in the state. There's a lot of heavy drinkers up in Montana. It's kind of an isolated place, and a lot of people go up there to get away from society, and they drink a lot. And so these people were petitioning the state to not charge these individuals with murder, but of course they were. Eventually they were. They tried to get them to charge them with second-degree murder because they weren't in their right minds, but they didn't. They charged them both with first-degree murder, and they prosecuted both of them. Alcohol will facilitate an individual's ability to come down off of methamphetamines. That's another reason why people drink methamphetamine or drink alcohol when they have been taking methamphetamines. But it also leads to violence, and that's kind of a problem. Compulsive gamblers drink while gambling, or they gamble while they're drinking. That's one of the reasons why they give them free drinks. They want them to be as inebriated as possible so that they're not as aware as they would be otherwise. They are trying to get them drunk. Unfortunately, many times people with mental disorders will use alcohol to relieve their symptoms. Among men and women who are alcohol dependent, 4% suffer from bipolar disorder, 4 times the figure for the general population. 5.3% of the general public suffer from major depression, while 28% of people diagnosed with alcohol dependence suffer from major depression. The other problem is that if you're drinking alcohol, you have a downregulation of your serotonin receptor sites. If you have a downregulation of your serotonin receptor sites, when you're not drinking, all of a sudden you're depressed. So it's one of the reasons why individuals who are alcoholics try to create chaos around them so that they can go and drink, and then they feel normal, because then they feel the normal level of happiness, just like everybody else around them. 16.4% of the general public suffer from anxiety, while 37% of the alcohol-dependent people suffer from the malady. So the question is, are they using alcohol to treat their problems, or is the alcohol causing them to have anxiety and depression? And of course, we don't have an answer for that. We really don't have an answer for that. However, it is difficult to draw direct parallels between alcohol and mental illness because the effects of alcohol mirror or can create mental problems. That's what I was just saying. Heavy drinking disrupts the neurotransmitters in the reward pathway that lead to feelings of well-being. Opioid peptides, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. Of course, GABA is one of the major neurotransmitters that is affected by alcohol, and GABA is what controls your anxiety level. In one detox center, 70% of the alcoholics were originally diagnosed as suffering from depression. After abstinence of a month or more, the depression diagnosis had dropped to 30%. Any psychiatric diagnosis must always take into account the possibility of drug-induced symptoms. And this is one of the reasons why, if somebody comes in with a problem, with a mental illness, and they're also an alcoholic, the first thing that you do is treat them for alcoholism. Because you may be treating symptoms that are created by the alcohol, and if the symptoms go away when you treat them for their alcoholism, then they really don't have, they're not really depressed, they don't really have anxiety problems. Individuals diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder show symptoms of impulsivity, lack of remorse for causing harm, and inability to learn from mistakes. These same symptoms are found in drug abusers, including alcoholics. 80% of those diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder develop substance dependence, and maybe it is a form of self-medication. They feel more normal when they're drunk, or when they're stoned, or when they're high on heroin. If a mother drinks during pregnancy, especially the first trimester of her pregnancy, there is a great possibility that the alcohol will do damage to the fetus, and she is more likely to miscarry or to cause infant death. Alcohol intake during pregnancy is the leading cause of intellectual disability in the United States. Ouch. Ouch. This is really a tragedy if you think about it, because this is something that we can control, or she can control. She just has to do it. But the number one cause of individuals suffering from intellectual disability is alcohol. As tragic and sad as that is. It used to be hypothyroidism. It used to be PKU. But it's not anymore. It's alcohol. And it's completely controllable. As tragic as all that is. Surveys of pregnant women in the United States show that 12.4% drank some alcohol during several months of their pregnancy. 4% used in binge patterns. 0.7% were heavy drinkers. 18% smoked cigarettes. 4.3% used illicit drugs at least once. I told you the story of my great niece who was using heroin during the pregnancy. She was also smoking cigarettes. And she would take pictures of herself with a cigarette dangling from her fingers with this great big belly, standing there, just being the coolest person in the whole wide world, as far as she was concerned. I was appalled and shocked. And I wanted to spit and punch somebody, maybe her. I didn't, of course. She was states away. I was living in Iowa. She was living in Indiana, so she was a whole state away from me. One study of 293 infants born with fetal alcohol syndrome and alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder in Portland, Oregon showed, and I told you the story, the kid was born with a heroin addiction, and it took them 6 weeks to get him, for him to go through withdrawals. Is he going to be normal? We don't know. He's only 3 years old, so we don't know.
Go through withdrawals too early.
He was a newborn. He was a neonate. 89% were using alcohol with at least 2 other drugs. 49% were using alcohol with cocaine. 100% were smokers. Most were single mothers. Most were high school dropouts. Most had a history of sexual and or physical abuse. Many had a history of drug or alcohol abuse in the family. Many had learning disabilities that may have come from substance abuse effects when they were in the womb. 293 infants born to alcohol, born in Portland, Oregon. In a study of FAS at the University of Washington, 2 groups of infants were followed into adolescence. If you know where the University of Washington is, it's in Seattle. If you know where Portland, Oregon is, it's right on the northern border of Oregon. So Seattle and Portland are probably 100 miles apart. And here we are, we're doing all this research on people that aren't able to control their drug usage. And these 2 cities are 100 miles apart. So this is an FAS study at the University of Washington. They followed them into adolescence. By the age of 5, 38% of the children's biological mothers had died of alcohol-related causes. The mothers were dead by the time they were 5 years old. 38% of these kids. By the time the group reached adolescence, 69% of the biological mothers had died of alcohol-related causes. That's 2 out of every 3. So the mothers who gave birth to these FAS children, 2 out of 3 of them were dead by the time they reached puberty, as sad as that is. 1 out of every 3 were dead by the time the kid was 5 years old. My grandson is 5 years old right now. Alcohol consumption during pregnancy can cause 3 varying degrees of problems. Fetal alcohol syndrome, which has retarded growth, facial deformities, problems with heart and limbs, central nervous system involvement, potentially lowered IQ with a range of 20 to 120 and a mean of 79. Intellectual disability starts at 70, and here the mean is 79. Alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, ARND, and alcohol-related birth defects. All 3 of these problems are referred to as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or a FASD. This is what it looks like. This is what a baby that is born normally looks like. As you can see, the brain is very involved. It fills the entire skull. This is a baby that is born a fetal alcohol child. As you can see, the convolutions and the fissures in the brain are far less involved than the one on the left. This is what a normal baby's brain looks like. This is what a FAS baby's brain looks like. As you can see, it's much smaller. It has fewer convolutions and fissures. It also has a smaller corpus callosum, but we're not really looking at the corpus. Yes, we are. We can look at the corpus callosum. Here's the corpus callosum on a normal child. You can see how large it is. This is the corpus callosum of a child with FAS. The corpus callosum is the communication between the left and right hemispheres. The larger the corpus callosum, the more information is passing back and forth. The smaller the corpus callosum, the less information that's traveling back and forth. As you can see, this child's corpus callosum is almost not there at all. Yeah. Serious problems. A child who suffers from less severe forms of FASD, ARND, or ARBD may have an IQ ranging from 49 to 142 with a mean score of 90, though they will have other problems. Difficulty with short-term memory, and part of that has to do with the smaller corpus callosum, problems storing and retrieving information because of the smaller hippocampus, difficulty forming links and making associations, problems making judgments and forming relationships, difficulty controlling temper and aggression, oversensitivity to bright lights, to loud noises, to sharp smells, to textures and tastes of food. So they will be sensitive to all of these things. I told you the story about the kid that was the first crack baby in Oklahoma City. The kid almost shot me with actually it was a 25 caliber pistol. It was a really odd caliber pistol, but it was 25 automatic. Worldwide FAS rates range from 0.33 to 2.9 cases per 1,000 births, though the figures vary by country and the use of alcohol. In the United States, the rates are 0.2 to 1.5 per 1,000 births. Asians and whites, 1 to 2 per 1,000. African Americans, 6 per 1,000. American Indians, 10 to 120 per 1,000, depending on where you are. Now the reality is, even though you guys would like it that there weren't any other tribes in the United States, just kidding. The people in the northern plains drink a lot more alcohol than you guys do. Their drinking problem is a lot more severe than it is down here. So when we talk about 10 to 120, we're talking about some tribes drink a lot more than other tribes. And the northern plains tribes seem to be the worst. We discovered fetal alcohol syndrome on the Pine Ridge Reservation. What did I read about Pine Ridge the other day? Something happened on Pine Ridge. I can't remember. Here's something for you. Let me throw this out. What's the age of consent in the United States? Age of consent. So it's if if Johnny gets a wild hair up his ear, and he decides he wants to have sex with I don't know, an elementary school student, how old does she have to be before you're not going to get arrested for statutory rape in the United States? What's the age? 18? It all depends on the state. Some of them are as low as 16. 16. It used to be 14 in Kentucky. Kentucky. I'm just kidding. They just changed the laws or they're trying to change the laws in France. There were two 11-year-olds that had sex with 30-year-old men. One was 29, one was 32. And they were both acquitted for having, in the United States, of course, if you have sex with them. If you're of age and you have sex with an 11-year-old, then that's statutory rape. It's always statutory. But in France, it's different. So they're trying to raise the age to 15, which is really kind of cute. I need to put on. It just seems kind of odd to me that these two 11-year-olds, and both of them claim that they were coerced and abused, but neither of the guys were prosecuted for statutory rape, as odd as that seems. Anyway, very strange. Hi, Armis. Let me sign everybody on. Okay. We got a quorum today. We got everybody. This is it. Today's Tuesday. Thursday, I'm going to have class. I will be here on Thursday to give my lectures, even though people are misreading my emails. I will be here on Thursday. And I won't leave until I finish talking to you guys. Okay. There you go. So what are we doing? We're giving birth to babies after we've been drinking. The incidence of ARND and ARBD are about 3 times that of FAS in all groups in the United States. So these are really kind of tragic figures. 10 to 120 per thousand, depending on what tribe we're talking about, depending on what part of the country we're dealing with. And like I said, the Northern Plains tribes seem to drink heavier than just about everybody else. The most destructive time to consume alcohol for the fetus is the 3rd week through the 8th week of gestation, when the brain is forming. The corpus callosum is forming, of course, and we saw the damage that can be done to a corpus callosum. The basal ganglia is being formed. This is the emotional portion. It controls the emotional portion of your brain. Brain cell migration and organization is taking place, and that's one of the reasons. Hermes, you got to see this. Are you ready for this? This is what a baby, whoops, I skipped it. This is what a FAS baby's brain looks like. That's what a normal baby's brain looks like. And the same thing over here. You can see, look at that. Isn't that amazing? The corpus callosum is almost non-existent in this kid. And here's the corpus callosum. It goes from here to here in the normal child. So this is what alcohol does to the baby's brain. If you drink between the 3rd and the 8th week, you get the brain doesn't develop nearly as well, and as tragic as all that is. During the 2nd trimester, the facial features are being formed and can be deformed by alcohol use. During the 3rd trimester, the hippocampus is forming, which might impair the encoding of visual and auditory information. So depending on when you're drinking and how much you're drinking, if you have stopped in the 3rd trimester, potentially you'll have, the baby will have a normal hippocampus. If you drink during the 2nd trimester, as heavily as you were in the 3rd trimester, you're going to have facial deformities. If you drink in the 1st trimester, of course, the corpus callosum is going to be stunted, and other structures in the brain are going to be stunted. The most destructive method of drinking for fetus is to drink in a rapid manner. In other words, binge drinking. So if you have abstained all through the week, and now it's Friday night, and Friday night you drink tequila shots, and of course you're matching shots with all your friends, and all your friends can drink 15 tequila shots. I don't know how many tequila shots anybody can drink, but that's a lot. That's a lot of alcohol being taken in all at one time. It is the concentration that is destructive in drinking. In that manner, of course, intensifies the concentration because you're drinking a large amount all at one time. Studies have shown that 7 drinks per week is the minimum baseline for negative neurobehavioral effects. But if the mother is consuming all of their alcohol in a binge pattern, the pattern becomes more important than the volume. So it's not really the volume as much as it is the amount that you're taking in at one time. So you're flooding that baby's brain with a lot of alcohol all at one time. And of course that stops all brain development as long as the baby's inebriated. And the reality is the baby's just as inebriated as you are. During the growth period, alcohol contact for 4 hours is enough to kill brain cells. It's killing your brain cells, but it's also killing the baby's brain cells. So the baby isn't really given an opportunity to develop. The only logical drinking pattern for a pregnant woman is none. Don't drink anything at all. That's the only logical pattern that you can have. Alcoholic fathers can also transmit mutated genes in their sperm due to the consumption of alcohol. While this can't lead to FAS, male children can suffer from other intellectual and functional deficits. Impaired verbal skills, impaired thinking processes, impaired planning skills, problems with visual spatial skills, problems with motor skills, memory deficits, learning impairment. Alcohol interferes with the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, the GABA, which reduces inhibitions. People with pre-existing aggressive tendencies will become more aggressive if they use alcohol. So aggressive people, if they drink, become more aggressive. 30% of the victims of violent crimes report that the perpetrator had been drinking alcohol before the offense. 15% of the robberies have to do with alcohol-related robberies. 26% of aggravated assaults. 50% of the homicides. It's not their fault. It's the alcohol's fault. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Wait a minute. Is that true? It's not my fault. It was the alcohol talking. I didn't really rape and murder that person. It was the alcohol that raped and murdered that person. Is that a good defense? Think I can get off? It's not going to work. When arrested, alcohol levels of probationers was 0.18. That's more than twice the level of drunkenness as far as most states are concerned. When arrested, alcohol levels of local jail inmates was 0.20. That's almost 3 times. That's 2.5 times. When arrested, alcohol levels of state prisoners was 0.28. That is 3 times, 3.5 times actually. In a study from Memphis, Tennessee of domestic violence calls, 92% of the perpetrators had consumed alcohol the day of the disturbance. There's a shock for you. 67% of the perpetrators had used cocaine the day of the disturbance. You mix cocaine and alcohol together, you get violence. Half had used alcohol and or cocaine often during the last 30 days. Alcohol encourages the release of pent-up anger, hatred, and desires that are normally controlled by society. The drunk's moral judgment and reasoning are impaired by the alcohol. And of course, now all of a sudden they want to strike out at somebody that insulted them or whatever. 34 to 74% of perpetrators of sexual assault had been drinking before the assault. 30 to 79% of the victims of sexual assault had been drinking prior to the assault. The worst thing to do if you don't want to be raped, then staying away from alcohol is a really, really good idea.
Bingo.
I know, we've already talked about it. All your friends, all my friends. In 2005, 40% of the motor vehicle fatalities involved alcohol, about 16,885 dead people. 90% of these situations involved a blood alcohol test of 0.08 or higher. 90%. 275,000 injuries occurred at the same time. There was a case in Great Falls, Montana in 2013 where an individual, she and her boyfriend were drinking at a bar, and it was time to go home. She had 3 of her kids in the car. She had her 3 kids in the car. She was, I don't know, 23 or 24. It's really kind of interesting. The boyfriend said he was too drunk to drive, so the mother decided that she would drive. So she got in the car. It was an SUV. So she got in the car and she took off, and she had to go around this curve. She was on a kind of a hill. It wasn't really a mountain. It was kind of a hill. And she missed the turn, and she went off into the air and landed. Didn't hurt her, crippled her boyfriend, killed 2 of her babies, and the other child had brain damage. So it hurt all. They didn't have them strapped in the back. They just had them in the back, asleep. They were asleep, and they were bouncing around like rag dolls. But the boyfriend was crippled. The mother wasn't hurt at all. 2 of her kids were killed, and 1 of her kids had brain damage. So they charged her with murder. And they let her off. She didn't get murder. First degree murder. She got second degree homicide or something for her 2 kids that she killed. They took her license away for 6 months.
6 months?
6 months.
For killing?
They took her license away for 6 months. The problem was that the boyfriend wasn't her boyfriend anymore, and he sued her for damages. And he won his case. Of course, this lady's on welfare. What is he going to get out of her? He got her car, which was still busted, by the way. I know, second degree homicide. So she went to jail for 6 months. That's when so she got her driver's license as soon as she got back out. And then he sued her. She lost her car.
And good for him. Just kidding.
I know. And the kid's in a home for children with TBI. Anyways, it's all a big mess. And they made a big deal out of it because right after she got out, about 2 months later, she got arrested for another DWI. Or DUI. Okay, what are we doing here? However, an aggressive advertising campaign and more aggressive sentencing for DUI infractions has reduced traffic fatalities by 18%. We see this practically every 3rd billboard in New Mexico has to do with DUI. I can't remember what they call it. I think they call it DWI in New Mexico. How stupid can you be? Pretty damn stupid, I guess. 1 in 4 drunks drive within 2 hours of their last drink. Remember, it takes you 60 to 90 minutes to get as inebriated as you're going to get. On any given weekday night between 10 o'clock and 1 a.m., 1 out of every 13 drivers is legally drunk. 1 out of every 13 drivers. On weekend mornings between 1 and 6 a.m., 1 in 7 drivers is drunk. I know people that will not drive on the weekends because they're afraid of drunks. I know people that won't drive on the reservation except in daylight because they're afraid of drunks on the highway. The cop that was killed by a drunk driver. That wreck that killed the cop over here that they got, she was drunk. On convicted DUI perpetrators, 61% drank beer only, 2% drank wine only, 18% drank liquor only, and 20% mixed their drinks. Alcohol-related crashes cost an estimated $148 billion in the United States every year. A blood alcohol test of 0.08 is the legal limit for driving under the influence. The individual does not have to show impairment to be found guilty. All they need to do is find out that they've been drinking. It is estimated that only 1 driver is arrested for every 300 to 1,000 drunk drivers on the road. What has worked over the years to reduce traffic deaths due to alcohol? One of them was lowering the legal inebriation levels from 0.10 to 0.08. Imposing immediate license revocation for individuals whose ethyl alcohol levels exceeded the legal limit, increasing the legal drinking age from 18 to 21. Back in the 70s, they changed the law. Jimmy Carter did it. He told the states that if they didn't raise the drinking age to 21, he wasn't going to give them any more highway money. And of course, every state gets millions and millions of dollars to fix their highways. There's only one state that doesn't comply. Does anybody want to guess what state that is? This is a state that makes tons and tons of money from alcohol. Any guesses? What state would you think it would be? Tennessee? They brew a lot of whiskey. Johnny, what state do you think it is? A state that makes tons and tons of money off of alcohol. So much more money off of alcohol that they say they don't need the highway money. Their roads are crap. They are the worst roads you can possibly imagine. Any guesses? California, that's a good guess, except they've got so many roads. Geez, if they didn't get highway money, they'd be a world of hurt. I'm trying to control my sweating. I'm doing pretty well.
I don't know,
New York? It turns out to be Louisiana. Wait a minute. They also have an open container law in Louisiana. In most states, you can't walk around with a beer. That's public intoxication, public drunkenness. But in Louisiana, they don't have those laws. So you can walk around with a cup. You're not supposed to walk around with a beer bottle or a beer can, but you can walk around with a cup with alcohol in it. I know. In Louisiana. Why? Mardi Gras. Louisiana makes billions of dollars off of Mardi Gras, as stupid as that sounds. It has something to do with beads, but I haven't quite figured that out. It also has something to do with nudity, and I'm not exactly sure what that's all about.
Don't forget green. Kidding.
And that's how you get your drinks, I guess. By showing your beads.
Jerry Springer. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I was sorry, I was watching Jerry Springer today. I want my Jerry beads. So it came up.
Where was I? Oh, Atlanta has what they call Freaknik, where all in the old days, people used to go to Mardi Gras. All the people used to go to Mardi Gras. But all the black college students would go to Atlanta, and they would have Freaknik during spring break. And they would have, it was kind of like Mardi Gras. They'd stop all the traffic and it was really kind of interesting. Freaknik, so it's a lot like, except you don't have any beads, you're just, begging people to expose themselves. As odd as that sounds. So what's going on here? What are we talking about? Maintaining zero tolerance for youth. Increasing the legal drinking age from 18 to 21. This was done in the 1970s. Maintaining zero tolerance for youth under 21 who are caught DUI. This has reduced crashes involving youth 17 to 50%. Impounding or towing vehicles of DUIs, requiring mandatory treatment for DUI arrestees, dram laws, those who serve are liable for a customer who becomes intoxicated. And this has really changed the way that they're pouring drinks in select states because they have dram laws. My son used to get in fights all the time because he would not, if he knew somebody was intoxicated, this kid doesn't drink. So he's a real Boy Scout. So here he is, he's a bartender, and he's really good at being a bartender, but he would cut people off fairly readily. And of course, that would piss everybody off, and then they try to get into fights. But if you've ever had a fight with a drunk person, they're not really very good fighters, especially if you're sober and they're not. Usually you can just kind of step out of their way and they miss you all the time. They're coming at you and all you have to do is kind of step to the side. They can only go in one direction. Pretty much straight. They're not very good at changing directions. Anyway, and so he used to have these these sham fights all the time where somebody was kind of chasing him around and would be running into things. Anyway, 22 states have dram laws and 14 have limited dram laws. Both Iowa and Illinois have active dram laws that makes a proprietor actionable if a patron causes an injury. I'm not exactly sure about Arizona or New Mexico. Medical reports involving alcohol, 15 to 25% of emergency room patients reported the use of alcohol, especially those involved in fights, assaults, and falls. Very irritating, going into the emergency room, trying to help somebody and they're drunk as a skunk. You want to just slap them stupid, more stupid than they already are. Alcoholics are 16 times more likely to die in falls and 10 times more likely to be burned or die in a fire. Really? Why are they dying in a fire? Why are alcoholics dying in a fire? Why are they more likely to die in a fire? Remember, it takes you 60 to 90 minutes to become the drunkest you're going to be. So you're drinking and you're trying to get drunk, and you do it. But of course you're smoking at the same time. So a lot of times they'll sit down or they'll lay down and they're fine, and they're smoking a cigarette, and all of a sudden they pass out. And now that cigarette drops onto their sheets and they burn themselves to death. As stupid as that sounds. 31% of boating fatalities had a blood alcohol test level of 0.10. There was a pitcher for the Marlins that died last year in a boating accident. He was also using cocaine, but he died in a boating accident. They actually were going at excessive amounts of speed. He was drunk, and the other two people in the boat were drunk, and they crashed against a rock. They hit a rock, and the boat exploded. And he died. The other two people died as well. 40% of the industrial fatalities and 47% of the injuries involve alcohol. Alcoholics commit suicide at twice the rate of the general population. Most alcoholics, if we took the average alcoholic in the United States, he would be white, he would be male, he would be middle-aged, I'm beyond middle-aged, he would be unmarried, because who can stand this idiot? He has a long history of drinking, so that's what the average alcoholic in the United States looks like. Culture determines how an individual will consume alcohol. Wet cultures such as Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, and Switzerland sanction daily use of alcohol. Most people do drink every day. They integrate social drinking into everyday life. I was stationed in Germany. We used to go over to France and play soccer. And we were playing against the Metz firemen one time. And I had a really good game. I don't know why I had such a good game. It was in the fog. It was so fun. They could barely see us. But we were playing soccer in the fog. And I scored like 3 goals. And I'm blocking these French guys. I'm tackling them all over the field. The French firemen, of course, they're kind of fat. Because they do a lot of drinking. And here I don't drink at all. And I was just running circles around these guys. So I had a really good game. So after the game, and this is the way they do it for these friendly matches, a lot of times they will trade jerseys with you. So I had all these guys that wanted to trade jerseys with me. Because we only had one set of jerseys, so we couldn't trade jerseys. But then they went inside, and of course everybody wanted to toast the game. We didn't win. They kicked our butts, but I played a pretty good game, so they wanted to toast, and they thought I was the captain of the team, so they wanted me to toast. Well, I don't drink. Well, you can't tell a Frenchman that you don't drink. They don't understand that. They do not understand that I'm a teetotaler. It just didn't fit. And so they started getting really angry and started yelling at me in French. Of course, I don't speak French, so I don't know how much of a son of a bitch I actually was, according to the French. But my son saw that the French were getting angry, and so he threw up. He threw up. He was only, 8 or 9 years old at the time, but he thought I was going to get beat up, I guess, and so he got all upset, and he vomited, and of course we took him out, because we told him that he was sick, and they were going, oh yeah, take him to the hospital over here, tell him that you're from the firemen, they'll give you a free medical care, that kind of stuff. Anyway, there's a lot of social drinking taking place. I almost got my ass kicked by all these Frenchmen who probably could have all kicked my ass. Anyway, my son saved my ass. They serve watered down wine to children with meals. So everybody drinks, not just the adults, but also the children. And the reason is because their water is toxic. Their water is contaminated. So even the kids have to drink. If you mix it with alcohol, the alcohol kills all the bacteria. They drink more beer and wine than dry cultures do, and these are the wet cultures. The most popular beer in the United States is Budweiser. Budweiser beer is owned by a Belgian company. And of course, the Belgians are a wet culture. Dry cultures such as they have in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, they restrict alcohol use with heavy taxing. They consume more distilled spirits, about 50% more, because when they drink, they want to drink something hard. They don't want to drink beer, because beer's just too expensive, and they don't get enough of a kick out of it. So they drink a lot of distilled spirits. It's characterized by binge drinking. These guys will not drink through the week, and then they will drink on the weekends. But they also have public transportation, so they don't have to worry about driving drunk. Mixed cultures such as that in Canada, England, or Germany, Ireland, and the United States, they demonstrate patterns of binge drinking, just like they do in the dry cultures. They have a higher incidence of violence to women than either the wet or the dry cultures. As interesting as that is, these mixed cultures. If you look at the spousal abuse rates, they're much higher in Canada than they are in the United States. They're pretty damn high in the United States, but they're actually higher up in Canada, as odd as that may seem. Russia has had an alcohol-soaked culture for 500 years. Vodka is traditionally drunk between meals in large quantities. So they're not just drinking alcohol with their meals, but it is traditional to drink between meals. So if you ever watch a movie about Russia, you see the guys drinking vodka before dinner. They'll drink a glass of vodka. We're not talking about shots here. We're talking about highball glasses filled up to the brim with vodka. And these guys and that's probably the strongest alcohol. Well, it's one of the strongest alcohols that is manufactured anywhere. A form of prohibition that started in 1985 resulted in illegal manufacture and 11,000 alcohol poisoning deaths in Russia. The male life expectancy actually rose in Russia during the prohibition period. So they prohibited the use of alcohol. This is during when the Soviet Union was still intact. And they saw all these poisonings taking place, but they actually saw the male life expectancy increase because they weren't drinking as much vodka. As soon as prohibition ended, alcohol poisoning increased to 40,000 per year. Male life expectancy dropped by 6 years in 1 year because the males were drinking so much vodka. It dropped 6 years life expectancy. In England, 70% of the population drinks regularly. 2/3 of the consumption of alcohol is in the form of beer, usually warm, and they play darts a lot. Of course, the drunker they get, the less likely they are to hit the dartboard. But their beer is room temperature, as horrible as that may sound. So, but it's actually they don't heat their rooms, so it's like, I don't know, 40, 45 degrees. The more people in the room, the warmer the beer, so that's not very pleasant. Recent attempts to curb destruction of alcohol in the British public has been in the form of prohibiting happy hours, allowing the pubs to stay open past 11 p.m. to reduce the need for binge drinking. That's what was happening in England. They were closing all the pubs at 11 o'clock, so everybody had to get all the booze in that they could just before 11 o'clock. So they were really consuming a lot of alcohol right there before 11 o'clock. Encouraging the English to reduce average consumption to 3 drinks per day. And of course that hasn't worked very well at all. On the average, men drink more per drinking episode than women do. Men also tend to have more adverse social and legal effects from the alcohol. Women tend to increase their drinking after they pass 30 years of age. Even when they are dependent on alcohol, women drink a third less than men do, men who are dependent on alcohol. So even a woman who is an alcoholic and a man who is an alcoholic, the woman will still not drink nearly as much as he does. Hereditary factors seem to be stronger in women when it comes to alcohol. Female alcoholics have 50 to 100% higher death rates than male alcoholics. Cirrhosis of the liver, circulatory disorders, suicide, and they have more accidents. The younger an individual starts using alcohol or tobacco, the more likely they will have a problem with the substances later in life. 6.2% of 8th graders have been drunk in the past month. Is that all? Just 6.2%? I think they all live in Oklahoma. 18.8% of the 10th graders have been drunk in the past month. 30% of the 12th graders have been drunk in the past month. Now you guys, I don't have a clue what's going on in the schools on the reservation, but is this anywhere close to being true? Do you have drunk 8th graders on the reservation? No?
When I was in middle school, I remember like 7 kids and a junior kid. Yeah, that was like the group that we had. And then in high school, apparently a lot of kids used to drink in high school, but yeah, I was not really part of the crowd.
So you think that's relatively accurate maybe for the reservation?
Yeah.
Or for Keyenta, that's right. You're from Keyenta,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. The immaturity of the adolescent brain can lead to unwise decisions. When this disinhibiting factor of alcohol is thrown into the mix, the individual is more likely to drive drunk, which is the dumbest thing in the world, to have sex with somebody and get pregnant, and to be, for the male, to be more sexually aggressive. In other words, forcing themselves on somebody. Drinking during adolescence leads to limited emotional growth. College students are adolescents in their until their junior year. 44% of their best and brightest admit to binge drinking. And this is at all the colleges in the United States. Just because Harvard is a Ivy League school doesn't mean that they don't drink. As a matter of fact, it may mean that they drink even more. At Princeton and Yale, they have drinking clubs. And these are clubs that you can join at 18, and of course nobody's going to come in and tell you you can't drink. So it's kind of a social thing. Wealthy people drink. They start drinking at a relatively young age, and this is one of the reasons why these drinking clubs exist at these very elite schools. So just because you're going to Stanford doesn't mean you're not going to run into the drunk kids on the weekend, or Chicago, University of Chicago, or wherever you happen to go. About half of the binge drinking college students admit that their grades fall into the C or to the F range. Many also admit to missing classes on a regular basis. A national study showed a direct correlation between the number of drinks consumed per week and the individual's grade point average. Women are more sensitive to the deleterious effects of alcohol on their grades. 86% will show the same pattern of drinking that they developed in high school. So those kids that were drinkers at Keyenta when they were in high school, if they went to college, probably not, if they went to college, they probably were drinking at the same level that they were drinking in high school. By graduation, the college-educated drink less than their non-college attending peers. Males binge more than females, 48.6% compared to 40.9%. 50.2% of white students binge as compared to 34.4% of Hispanic students, 26.2% of Asian students, and 21.7% of black students. Now, why don't they talk about American Indian students? Why not? Why don't they talk about American Indians? I'm sorry, there's not enough of you. I apologize. It's not my fault. You don't even figure into anybody's statistics. There's not enough of you. If you go to Harvard, how many American Indians are at Harvard? 100, 200, out of 20,000? It's just not enough. It's not enough. University of Chicago, how many Indians do they have there? Just a handful. Sorry. So you guys don't figure in. But as you can see, This fits with the national averages. So the people that are drinking the most are white people. The best alcoholics in the United States are white people. Well, I just showed you that demographic. It's a white male that's middle-aged. But the reality is, and they did this study up in Montana where they have 7 Indian reservations, 6% of the population is Indian. Guess who drinks more? The Indians or this is Northern Plains. Guess who drinks more? The Indians or the white people there?
White people?
The white people, of course the white people. They're number one. I'm telling you, we're number one. We're the best drinkers in the whole wide world. We're the ones that invented this stuff. So we're number one. We drink a lot more than other people. Look at that. 52.2% of white students are binging compared to 34.4% of Hispanics. I mean, nobody's even close. That's 16% less. Look at the black students. Geez, they're not even half. Oh, we wipe everybody off the table. We're so good. I know. We're number one. Fraternity residents binge at 75.4%. Of course, we don't have fraternities here. It's probably a good thing. Dormitory residents binge at 45.3%. Off-campus residents binge at 54.5%. Married students binge at 26.5% because they have responsibilities. College drinking leads to 1,700 deaths per year, 690,000 physical assaults, 599,000 injuries, 97,000 sexual assaults. And of course, we've heard the stories of some of the sexual assaults that have happened on some of the college campuses. Intelligence about drinking doesn't increase with age. 2,500,000 Americans have alcohol-related problems as patterns develop, sometimes as pre-adolescents, can continue into old age because they want to be cool. And you want to be cool at all ages, so you continue to drink. Alcohol can deplete bone density, especially in women who tend to be more susceptible to osteoporosis. What are the 2 groups that are susceptible to osteoporosis? American Indians, you guys number one? Who's susceptible to osteoporosis? The paler the people, the more they are susceptible to osteoporosis. That's white people and Asians are the two groups that are the most susceptible to osteoporosis. So they need to stay away from alcohol. But guess who's the number one drinkers in the United States, in the world? White people, of course. Surprisingly, about 1/3 of all older people who drink didn't start until they were older. And, they're drinking for coping reasons. Asians and Pacific Islanders have the lowest alcohol consumption rate of any of the major racial or ethnic groups in the United States. 4% of the adult population are heavy consumers. Filipino and Japanese Americans are the most likely from this group to drink heavily. Why? Because they have had the most contact with white people. Filipinos, and actually we used to control the Philippines, and of course we used to occupy Japan right after World War II. We occupied Japan. Koreans have the highest number of abstainers. African Americans have the second lowest percentage of heavy drinkers in their population at 4.2% compared to whites at 7.4%. Only 40.8% of black males drink monthly compared to 56.5% of white males. Peak drinking seems to occur after the age of 30. Explanations for high levels of abstention among blacks may be their long history of strong spirituality and matriarchal family structures. So African Americans are the second lowest drinking ethnic group in the United States. 8.1% of Hispanic population consume alcohol at a heavy rate. Heavy alcohol use is highest among Mexican Americans. Past month use runs about 46.7%. Binge drinking runs at about 25.8%. 6.2% of Hispanics can be classified as alcohol dependent. What was it for white people? 7.1%, 7.4%, something like that. American Indian Alaska Natives have drinking rates that greatly vary by region of the country and by tribal affiliations. The heaviest drinking appears to occur among the Northern Plains tribes. Of the 10 leading causes of death, 5 are directly connected to alcohol abuse. Number 3 is unintentional injuries. Number 4 is diabetes. Number 6 is liver disease and cirrhosis. Number 8 is suicide. And number 10 is homicide. For American Indian Alaska Natives, alcohol-related motor vehicle deaths are 5.5 times higher than the general population. Cirrhosis of the liver is 4.5 times higher. Alcoholism is 3.8 times higher. Homicide is 2.8 times higher. Suicide is 2.3 times higher. Now, why in the world, if white people drink more, why do you guys have such horrible, abysmal levels of cirrhosis, alcoholism, homicide, and suicide? If we drink more than you guys do, why do you guys suffer from it more? You guys gave us tobacco, and that kills off just tons and tons of people, right? Way to go. You're murderers. But white people gave you alcohol. Remember, white people have been drinking alcohol for what, 10,000 years? For like ever? How long have you guys been drinking alcohol? Johnny? Yeah, as soon as the white people got into the area, you guys started consuming alcohol just like they did. They drank it like water they could because, they've been drinking for like ever. And you guys just started a couple hundred years ago, 200, 300, 400 years ago. You're novices. You're not nearly as good at it as we are. So you suffer from it more. If you go to portions of, if you go to Europe, you've got people that are drinking really a lot of alcohol and they're not getting drunk and they're not suffering from it. What's going on? Well, the genetics, of course, genetics change, epigenetics, all this stuff changes. So all the people that were going to die from alcohol consumption died out a long time ago. They fell out of the gene pool as far as Europeans are concerned. You guys, it just hasn't happened yet. You haven't been drinking long enough. Drink more, drink longer, and you'll have the same effects that white people do. Eventually, you're going to catch us, and all this is going to go down. Because all the people that suffered from all these things, most of them will have dropped out of the gene pool. And that's the way it works. And that's the way it works. And that's the end of the chapter about alcohol. So what's the next chapter about? This one was fun. What's the next one? Oh, all-arounders. Okay, we're going to talk about psychedelics. That sounds like fun. We get to talk about marijuana. Psychedelics alter a user's perceptions, whereby reason becomes unimportant, and intensified sensations create illusions, delusions, and hallucinations. This is a lot of fun. Psychedelic fungi and plants have been used by humans since Neanderthal man. What race were Neanderthals? Any ideas? Do you guys have any Neanderthal ancestry? Do you? Do you?
Probably.
I don't know. They were in North Africa. They were in Southern Europe. Okay. And if you guys, whether you came from Asians or not, it really doesn't make any difference. You guys were way too far away from the Neanderthals to have any of their DNA. However, I'm a European. I had an uncle that looked like a Neanderthal man. He's about as smart as a Neanderthal man, too. Actually, he was really smart, but he couldn't talk. He couldn't talk. And there was something wrong. He always talked like this. And so you thought that there was something wrong with him, but there wasn't anything wrong with him. Just the way he talked. Talked like a Neanderthal man. Amanita mushrooms have been used in India for 4,000 years. Belladonna has been used since ancient Greece. Marijuana was snorted in ancient China. LSD in the form of rye fungus, ergot, was consumed in Renaissance Europe. So all of these psychedelics have been around for a long time. Psychedelics are readily used today in several forms and have waxed and waned in their popularity over the years. MDMA, 2.3% of high school seniors used it in 2000. By 2003, MDMA use was down to 1.3%. It's illegal, and that may be one of the reasons why it went down so low. LSD, 4% of high school seniors used it in 1995. By 2006, only about 0.6 used it. One of the problems with LSD is that it stays with you for, ever. So this can be a problem. Marijuana, 37.4% of high school seniors used it in 1979. By 1992, it was down to 11.9%, had been cut by 2/3. By 1999, it had risen to 23.9%. It had doubled in just 7 years. By 2006, the percentage had gone down to 18.3%. So marijuana is not that popular. Now the problem in Arizona and New Mexico is that you're right on the Mexican border. So there's a lot of drugs coming across the border. So what happens in Arizona and New Mexico may not be what's happening in Tennessee and Kentucky and West Virginia. Who was I talking to? And they said, you guys eat a lot of hot Cheetos. Those are hot Cheetos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Evidently it's the chip that people on this reservation consume. Hot Cheetos. So I congratulate you on being a conformist to hot Cheeto eating. I don't know, Johnny eats them too. I see you with hot Cheetos all the time. I've seen Ernest with hot Cheetos. Yes, I have. Haven't I? No? Okay. Maybe I'm making things up again. Marijuana is used the most among white people. Marijuana is used the least among black people. There's a shock for you. Hispanic use it somewhere in between the white people and the black people. So black people use the least marijuana. Psychedelics come in 5 chemical configurations. Indols, LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, phenylalkylamines, peyote and MDMA, anticholinergics, belladonna and datura, cannabinoids, marijuana. Those in class by themselves, ketamines, PCP, salvia divinorum, and dextromethorphan, the cough medicine. The effects of psychedelics is determined by toxicity of the substance, the amount used, the user's experience with the drugs, the emotional makeup of the user, the mood and the mental state at the time of use, pre-existing mental illnesses, the surroundings in which the drug is taken. One of the problems with all of these psychedelics is that they mimic psychosis. So if an individual has a proclivity for psychosis, it can kick them into psychosis. So the first time you use LSD, maybe the last lucid thought you had was before you took the LSD. This can happen with marijuana. I told you about the individual that was using crystal meth. She'd been using crystal meth for an extended length of time. It kicked her into psychosis, and she started having psychotic episodes. As long as she stayed away from crystal meth, she was okay. But she had used it twice and she'd had 2 psychotic episodes. The next time might have been the last time. She might have kicked herself right into psychosis. Most hallucinogens stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which results in a rise in pulse and blood pressure, sweating, palpitations, and usually nausea, which is always fun when you're trying to get high. Psychedelics interfere with select neurotransmitters. They interfere with dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, anandamide, glutamate, alpha-cytosine, but especially with serotonin, especially MDMA. Really increases the amount of serotonin being released in your brain. Psychedelics greatly affect mood because serotonin is amply represented in the limbic system. Stimulation in the reticular formation of the brainstem tends to overload the sensory pathways, making the user acutely aware of all their sensations. Overstimulation of the visual and auditory centers may cause auditory stimulation to jump to the visual pathway so that music might be seen and sights such as colors may be heard. This crossover of sensations is referred to as synesthesia, and we see this a lot with individuals on LSD, but also with MDMA and with marijuana. MDMA is really kind of interesting because if you know anything about raves, the music that they play is very repetitive, and it has a heavy backbeat. So there's a heavy bass with the music that they play. And these individuals who have taken MDMA, of course, they're seeing colors, they're smelling colors. They're smelling music. They get an odor from all this stuff. I know. They get all the synesthesias taking place, and they get all kinds of odd sensations from the music that's being played very loudly and with a very heavy backbeat. An illusion is a mistaken perception of an external stimuli. LSD and most psychedelics cause people to have illusions. A delusion is a mistaken idea or belief that cannot be swayed by reason or other contradictory evidence. LSD and most psychedelics cause people to have delusions. So they have illusions and they have delusions. They also have hallucinations. Hallucination is a sensory experience that does not come from external stimuli, but is perceived as coming from an external stimuli. It's not really coming from that, but you think that it's coming from that. And this is known as a hallucination. Mescaline, psilocybin, and PCP cause hallucinations. LSD, psilocybin, mushroom, ibogaine, morning glory seeds. Really? Morning glory seeds? Domethyltryptamine, Foxy, AMT, and ayahuasca are the indole psychedelics. These substances create mental interaction by inhibiting the serotonin receptor sites, especially the 5-HT2A sites. This affects your sleep, your mood, your anxiety level, and it can form hallucinations and illusions. That's LSD, morning glory seeds. Well, anyway, LSD is the only one that most people have heard of. There was one of the Bridget Jones movies. She went to Thailand and they slipped her magic mushrooms and she starts having all these hallucinations. No? Nobody's seen Bridget Jones? Okay, it's the second movie where she gets arrested for drug possession in Thailand, which is life sentence in Thailand. LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, is also known as sacrament, as odd as that sounds. Acid, of course, blotter. Barrels, I'm not exactly sure what they call it. Barrels, orange, sunshine, illusion, and window panes. Why do they call it window pane? They call it window pane because they mix it with cyanide and it gets into your system really, really fast. It takes about an hour. If you drop acid, it takes about an hour for it to get into your system. But if you have window pane, which is mixed with cyanide, it gets into your system almost instantaneously. Unfortunately, cyanide is rat poison. Oh. So you could die from taking a hit of window pane. LSD is a I think I told you that story. Did I tell you that story? I was substitute teaching in a phys ed class, and this was in Indiana. And my students were supposed to, or the students were supposed to run like 3 laps or something stupid. Anyway, these 2 girls dropped window pane. They had dropped window pane in the class before. It wasn't in my class. Anyway, when they started running, they started having seizures. Both of them did. One of them died right there. This is before I had any medical training, and there was not a whole hell of a lot I could have done. Now she's dead. The other one we saved. We were able to save the other one. but one of them actually died from dropping window pane. LSD is a semi-synthetic chemical compound found in the ergot fungus, found in some cereal grains, but especially in rye. This substance was first isolated from the ergot fungus in 1938, and it was synthesized. LSD failed as a psychological enhancement substance in psychotherapy and as a treatment for alcoholism. They tried to use it for a lot of different things. Okay, do I have time? Cary Grant, they used it, he was depressed, and they used it on his depression, and it actually worked on Cary Grant. So if you ever read a biography of Cary Grant, then that's one of the positive things that has come out of LSD. It was purchased by the CIA, of course. We tried to weaponize it. We had a program referred to as MK Ultra, where we tried to weaponize this drug. One of the CIA's researchers was Harvard Professor Timothy Leary. Leary discovered its psychedelic properties by accident and then experimented on purpose. It was Leary who gave LSD to the rest of the world. LSD is actually a relatively simple compound to make. It was made illegal in 1966. Leary discovered it in 1958, started giving it to his friends, decided that you needed to drop in and drop out. No, that's not it. I can't remember. Anyway, Timothy Leary had this thing that he said. He wanted everybody to try LSD because it was mind expanding. But of course, if you read the stuff that Timothy Leary has said, it doesn't sound all that mind expanding to me. I mean, after he was a chemist, he was a PhD chemist, and he did absolutely nothing after he started using LSD. Most of his time was taken up dropping acid, actually. And he died, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. They cremated him, and they shot his ashes into outer space. He was on one of those space shuttle things. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. I'll talk about more about LSD. It doesn't take, it takes a drop, okay? It takes just a tiny, tiny little bit of LSD. And if you take even more than that, do you poison yourself? The answer is no, of course. You do not poison yourself. You can only use a select amount, and only a select amount works.